Hello friends, welcome to episode 34. We are getting through them, although the work on the cab is taking an extraordinarily long time. I'm down to doing all the little fiddly bits now, which is the windscreens need to go back in, the windscreen wiper needs to go back in, a few other little bits and pieces back into the cab. I'm hoping today to put the very final coat of paint on the floor of the RT. I still need to make one final gasket. I've got some rubber come in for that, so the final gasket hopefully will be made today, and at least it'll start looking like the cab of an RT again. Now, moving ahead to deep winter, that's when it gets really cold up here. It's quite nice actually at the moment. I plan today to start prepping the ceiling panels for the lower deck of the RT. Like I said, that's going to be the main part, putting them back. It's going to be a deep winter job when it's freezing cold in here and I can actually warm up the inside of the bus, or at least I hope so anyway. So yeah, let's see how we get on today. Yeah, and thanks for sticking with us through these. I know it is very slow and it is quite painful. So if you ever want to buy an RT, be prepared for a lot of work. Anyway, let's see how we get on today.
Right, and a lot of work it is too. Yeah, Saturday started with this beautiful sunrise over the Essex countryside, looking quite ominous because we're about to get thunderstorms and heavy rain over the weekend, but more about that probably a bit later. Yeah, anyway, this weekend posed a number of I try to avoid the word problems, but solutions had to be found. The problem is we're getting to the point now where a lot of what's being done is fiddly, and it takes a long while to do little fiddly things. Doing the big things and sticking them on, I mean, it looks like you've made a huge amount of progress, but the tiny little things take a long while to achieve. However, you know, certainly some progress this weekend, but not as much as I'd like to have done. But anyway, more about that in a minute.
I've had to do something today I haven't done for ages, and that was go down the local Wick store. I've got loads of these trays, but could I find one in here? I think it went in the big clean-up that I did several months ago. So unfortunately, I had to pop down to Wick's to get this. Never mind. If I hadn't have done it today, well, you know, this is a job I wanted to do.
Right, it's not going to get done on its own, is it? This floor has been a bit of a bane of my life, and it's thrown up a few minor challenges. The problem is it's awkward. It's awkward to climb in the cab, lay on your stomach and sort of hang your arms over into this sort of recess, as it were, and work in there. So I take my hat off to engineers all over the place who work on vehicles, you know, dirty engines, gearboxes and stuff like that. It's a lot more awkward than this. They're probably, you know, more than happy to do something like this, but I find it quite awkward. Anyway, there's that little strip you can see just protruding up. That holds the rubber strip down. I've got to order up some Whitworth bolts for that, because Whitworth RTs used, well, vehicles of that age use Whitworth, which was long before the British standard threads that we use on majority of things now. So anyway, that gap, you can see that gap there, right? The front section where the pedals are, that's mounted to the chassis. And the rear section towards the camera is mounted to the body. And that means, unfortunately, the chassis and the body move almost independently. So you have to have these rubber gaskets all around the floor to deal with the movement. And this particular one, that particular gap there, suffers probably the most movement of all. Anyway, so what I need to do is remake the rubber for that, because it had totally deteriorated. I'll show you later on. I've got a couple of pictures of the ones that went down each side of the cab floor to see actually how bad they were. But this one had turned to nothing, basically. So I had to go at remaking this. So the first thing I've got to do is clamber in the cab with my measuring thing and measure how much of the rubber that I need to cut off the small roll that I'd purchased. Right, that's the state of the rubber that come out of the cab. As you can see, it's completely unusable. At the top of the shot shows my first attempt at remaking these rubber strips. This is the top of it, that bit of rubber at the top. That's actually an inner tube from a tractor. So we managed to get a old inner tube from our tyre contractors, and I cut it to try to shape it, but it just didn't work. So I ended up having to buy some rubber. So that basically, having bought the rubber, a friend of mine, I called him Ricky Dave, turned up and he goes, "What are you doing there?" And I said, "I'm trying to make these little the rubber strips that go down the side of the cab." And he said, "I've got 2 unused ones. Do you want them?" So we did a quick deal, and that saved me an awful lot of bother, because using that rubber inner tube was clearly not working. I'll throw these in for good measure. These are the strips that sit down the side of the rubber. Now, what they do is they clamp down the rubber either side of the driver's footwell. Now, what I needed to do to cover that gap you saw earlier, I've had to remake one of these. The one nearest the camera has rotted quite badly at one end, but unfortunately I've got no choice, had to use it. But the one on the left hand side is actually in pretty good condition, so I rubbed both down with the orbital sander you can see in shot there, and took all the paint off, and I've repainted them, and they've come up really nice. But obviously there's a bit missing from one of them, but unlucky really. And listen, that is not something you can just say, "Oh, I'll get a bit of beading," because it's actually shaped. It's got a kind of lip on it. It's like a C channel thing. So I couldn't really do much with it, so I had to reuse the old ones. Right, so here we are with that gap covered. You can see the small picture down the bottom there is the large gap you can see between those 2 plates. And here is my first attempt at covering that gap. So now I wasn't very happy with that. What I'd done was I'd cut it to size. If you look at that one that runs round to the left, that's the bottom bit's brand new, and then the next bit is obviously brand new, goes around in a bit of a curve. So that bit, although it doesn't look like it, that actually does butt up against the one at top of shot. On the right hand side, it butts up against that one top of shot on the right. Anyway, but that covers the gap. Problem was, I had thought that just by simply using the original mounting points, it will hold the rubber down. How wrong was I? So I had to make a little metal strip to cover that, to basically hold it down properly, because there it looks a little bit crap, basically, doesn't it? There we are. So let's move on to the next bit. Right, so apologies if this is turning into a bit of a slideshow. I didn't mean to do that. But anyway, we just got mainly photographs. I got somewhere I've done stuff to camera. But anyway, there you are. With the rubber strip in, but minus the little metal plate. And the reason it doesn't look so bulbous and sticking up everywhere is because I haven't actually drilled the holes which you saw in the previous picture. There's pictures the opposite way around. So this is the first attempt before I drilled all the holes. Finding the holes was a bit of a pain because they've got these sort of retaining sort of threads into the plate of the bus. So what I had to do was make a template. So I got the holes in the right place and then transfer the template onto this rubber strip. But you can see, I think actually I quite like those bits of rubber now. I think they look really nice. And had I continued using that tractor inner tube, I don't think it would have looked anywhere as good as this. Right. As if by magic, Blue Peter styley, here's one I've made earlier. No, I didn't really. Do you know, it took about 4 hours to get to this point. I had to cut all that rubber, which wasn't that difficult. Oh, hang on, I'll tell you what I will say. That isn't actually rubber, it's neoprene, which is a kind of synthetic rubber. It's probably cheaper, I don't know if it's any better, but it cuts all right, shape's okay, does the job, I suppose, who cares? Anyway, so to stop that bit bulging up because the screw holes weren't right, I had to make that little metal plate, and you can see I've sprayed it or painted it already, and I need to put more coats on that because that's going to get absolutely hammered. But there we are. So that's the that little rubber to cover that gap. I promise I'll do a piece to camera, honestly. I will do a piece. It won't all be slides, really, seriously. I think I've got one coming up now. Here we go. Here's me with a pot of paint.
Right, here's a little job for this morning. Quite a nice one, actually. I just got to put some matte black paint onto these 2 bits. This is the rubber gaiter that sits in the cab, and the handbrake pull sits in the middle there. It's got a little bit worn. I don't know if you can see that. It's got a bit worn there, so I've done my best to repair it. Yeah, perhaps not the best of repairs, but anyway, it's holding it in place for the time being. And this is the trafficator. So there's a little lens in there, and there's a little bit of bevel in there and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's the trafficator. I'm going to put some matte black on these and get these tidied up. I've also got this other few little bits and pieces. This is the indicator from the cab. You might recall I had an issue with it not working. So I stripped it down, cleaned it out as best I can. It's not easy in there, actually. It's quite intricate. So I cleaned it out as best I can, cleaned all the contacts up, and my multimeter tester thing says it's working. So we'll see what happens when we put it back on the bus, but that's a job probably for next week once the paint's dried in the cab. So, right, I shall get on with this then. Wish it was Blue Peter. You'd have one I've prepared earlier. Anyway, never mind.
The only way we can do things prepared earlier, Blue Peter style, is to speed things up. So here we go, let's speed this up. And then for some reason the recording stopped. I don't know why. Maybe the camera got bored.
Right, you join me as I forgot to press record to record me painting that, but it wasn't particularly interesting. This is the indicator for the outside of the bus. So that's all I've done is put a little bit of this matte black paint on it. I've also done the handbrake pull as well. There's a little rubber sort of thing that the handbrake sits in the cab. So I've done that. Just on the back here is the RT's indicator selector thing. You may recall I put it on the bus a couple of weeks ago, tested the wiring, and it didn't work. I know I tested all the wires, but when I added this into the circuit, it decided it didn't want to work, neither way. So I took it apart, and it was absolutely full of crud. It's a bit worrying, really, how it gets that bad. So we managed to take it apart. I've cleaned it out as best I can. It's not perfect. I've cleaned all the contacts up, tested it with the multimeter, and it works fine. So all I need to do now is to paint this, that red, that black, and hopefully pop it back in the cab at some point. It won't happen this weekend because I want the floor to dry before I start messing around in there significantly. The other thing, this is a little bit here for the conduit. I had to buy that, so a little piece. On the RT, where the conduit is in the cab, they'd cut a big hole in it to get the wires through. So I bought a brand new one there. Right, so let's get on.
Right, and we will too. This is a flashback to probably about early July, I think, yeah, July 2nd, according to my photograph list. Of the cab before I put all the stuff back in at the front, and I painted that floor up really nicely, and when I went to put the door in, unfortunately I managed to scratch it all up. It was a bit of an effort actually getting the cab door back in on my own, and I kind of expected I was going to bash it a bit, but sadly that bit to the extreme right of shot got damaged slightly, so I ended up having to chuck some paint over that. But yeah, and the rest of the paint, the cab floor obviously, I had painted that on Saturday, and by Sunday I'd had hoped it had gone off hard enough for me to clamber in and out the cab, but it was still a little bit tacky, so I had to be a bit, I wouldn't say tacky, soft is probably the correct word for it. So I had to be very, very careful what I did in the cab and curtail a lot of activities. Unfortunately, the weather was going to not be on my side. I'll come to that in a minute. Did I say don't buy anything from Wix? No, maybe I didn't, but other retailers are available, obviously. Yeah, this was this was a bit of wasted activity. I'd gone down the barn, and I knew, you know, those little paint trays you get that you put your rollers in. I knew I had a load of them, but when I had my mass clear out, I threw most of them away. Although when I say most, I think actually all of them away. So I turned up with my roller, and there's nothing to put the roller in. So I was a bit annoyed really, and I had to pop down the local Wicks and buy a roller set. Yeah, fun it was not. Oh, and that sky is looking very threatening, isn't it? Those storm clouds are starting to gather, and they were really going to spoil my day. No sooner have I got back to the barn and put the kettle on, this happened. Monsoon rain. I quite like this shot. It's very cinematic. Yeah, I managed to brave the rain, as you can see, to go and stand underneath the tree and take this footage of really quite diabolical conditions. The sky, as you can see at the back of the shot, is absolutely beautiful. And I spoke to some of my friends and they said, we didn't see any rain. It was torrential, as you can see, which really caused me some problems in the barn. My plan was to put another coat of brown on that floor, so I had about at least 2 or 3 coats over the weekend. Unfortunately, what with that rain, the humidity levels rose quite sharply in the barn, which put paid to any of my oil-based painting. But luckily, having gone to Wicks before the humongous downpour, I had a little job I could do, because that primer, which I'm about to start sticking on these panels, is water-based. Oh right, sorry, yeah, rubbishy edit there. I don't think I want to bore you with me stirring paint. Anyway, like I said just now, this is water-based paint, so it didn't really matter how much it rained outside and what the humidity levels were like inside the shed. As I said before, it does affect oil-based paints, but water-based paints, water doesn't affect water. But apparently it does say on there that I can't mix it with water. So yeah, discuss. Right, what this is a primer. My friend who's doing his RTL, who actually went out and bought these panels, we did a sort of a joint enterprise really. He bought the panels and we sort of went halves on them. So this is some sort of plywood which forms the lower deck ceiling of the RT. Now my one was all bowed and pretty horrible, and I took it out donkey's back, but yeah, you couldn't put it back like the state it was in. Some people have cheated and they've used aluminium. I'm not entirely keen I want to do that, because the problem with aluminium, Rootmasters use aluminium, it's a brilliant idea, but as soon as somebody gets in with something metal and bashes the ceiling, you've got a dent in it, whereas this wood is a little bit more forgiving with minor dents. Obviously you can punch a hole through it if you hit it really hard, but yeah, it's a little bit more forgiving. So what I need to do in this shot is to plaster this thing and its sister panels with this primer. Now Billericay Dave, who I mentioned just a minute ago, he's doing some other strange combination of mixing varnish with a wash of white spirit, and then he's putting that over the top of the panel. The reason we're doing it is because the paint sinks back quite quickly. If you imagine it's like a sponge or something, and you paint a sponge, then it goes sort of what just absorbs into the sponge, and what he's worried about is that the paint will just keep absorbing into this. Or I'm not entirely sure. So I had a chat with my brother who's a carpenter, and he had an ask around, and somebody suggested this stuff, and it went on quite nice, but there was a bit of a weird thing in the instructions. It says it cures over 1 month. 1 month? Seriously? You're going to have this curing in the barn for 1 month? Well, actually, that's okay for this project, because this is my winter project and I'm going to do this over the winter. So I'm going to get these panels prepped up, painted, put a coat on this weekend, and I'll put a coat on next weekend. So this is ideal really for crappy weather. But when the winter really starts to bite and it gets to minus God knows whatever in there, then I'll start doing the interior. I'll warm up the cab, warm up the interior of the bus, and then I'll work inside. But if I'm working where I am now in sort of, I don't know, sort of January, February, you really do feel the cold. In fact, I couldn't even feel my fingers last time I was up here in January, and I was using a heat gun to warm my fingers up. It was that bad. It's really horrible in there in the winter. So yeah, make use of the summer while it shines. Right, so first panel completed, and where else is a great place to leave the panels to dry is up alongside the RML. I put that sheet there just in case any of the paint came off and ended up on the bus. I didn't want. So I just leaned it against the side of the RML. That's RML 2428, a former Centre West one. Also started life at Garston Bus Garage, which is, and it ousted my RT. It ousted RT3461 when it arrived in, I think, about 1968. The details are out there somewhere. Right, these panels that I'm now carrying away, that's one of the new panels, obviously, and the old panels that came out of my mate's RTL are sitting there. And I'm puzzled, to be honest with you. I always thought that RT ceilings, lower deck ceilings, were cream. This is some sort of emulsion white. Now, it was on a farm for a long while, this bus. It was rescued from a farm. And you think, I know what they've done. They've just emulsioned the ceiling. Well, no, I don't think they have, because there's no evidence there whatsoever of that panel being emulsioned or having any other colour other than this kind of off-white. I'd noticed there was a little bit of, it was a bit thin on the paint, so I brought the roller back, and when I'm a bit fussy like that, I'm a funny character. So anyway, yeah, so there'll be a second and a third coat, I'm sure. It won't be the end of that. So there are those panels, and as the day progressed, eventually I managed to get all of them to line up alongside the RML. So there's the ceiling panels, a job for the winter. Okay, so let's finish up with a quick couple of pictures of the other goings on in the barn other than my RT and I. Here is DM999, Nick's bus. They went off to the Barleylands rally on Sunday. And it was only down, I think about half an hour away from where we are. And when he came back, I said, "It's pouring rain." He said, "No, of course it hasn't been lovely. We've really enjoyed ourselves." And Peter Fig's doing the Bromley Open Day next weekend. It's 100 years of Bromley Bus Garage, and they're running route masters and RTs and various other things on the 61 and the 261. I did point out to Peter, though, that the 261, this has been a bit sort of nerdy, but the 261 in Orpington and Bromley is actually quite a new innovation. And came about probably about the 90s, because the original 261, as I know it, was RT operated and run between Arnold's Grove and Barnet. And I actually had the pleasure of travelling on the very last vehicle on that. But yeah, before it got withdrawn, then ended up in Bromley. I think it runs from Lewisham to Bromley Common or something like that now. I think it used to go all the way to Orpington at one time, and they cut it back again. But anyway, hey ho. So there you are. Next week, if you want to go to a bus rally, you've got this one at Bromley to attend, and Peter Fig will be down there with his route master. So thanks very much, everyone. We'll kill it here. It's just gone over 20 minutes, so thanks very much for sticking with me, and let's see how we get on next week, shall we?